When my friend Ian Seabrook over on the HubNut channel reviewed this very car a few years ago, it's one of the few times I've seen him struggle to find anything good at all to say about a car. So when it came up for sale a short while later, naturally I didn't let that put me off, and I bought it anyway. In fact, I've really come to like it, so what I'm going to do now is show you why it won me over. Marvellous. Good old Vauxhall. The thing I really like about this car is it's just so simple. It's like a diagram in a kid's book about how a car works. There is nothing complicated about it, and that means it responds really well to being fixed, except actually not very much goes wrong. The Vauxhall hasn't run for about a year and a half because it's been stuck in the shed behind a broken BMW E30, but that's another story. But all it needed was a quick wash and a splash of petrol, and it's ready to go for a drive in the sunshine. When Winston Churchill, or whoever it was, said that history is written by the victors, he probably wasn't talking about Vauxhalls, because this is probably the epitome of the conventional car. It's a conventional 3-box saloon with a conventional front engine rear wheel drive configuration. The suspension is quite conventional, reasonably contemporary. It's got coils all round and a Panhard rod at the back rather than leaf springs, which a lot of cars still had back in the late 60s when this was designed. Came out in 1972. The last in a long line of Vauxhall Victor saloons, it was launched just after the Mark III Cortina and fitted somewhere in between the Cortina and the Granada console range in terms of its position in the market. The Victor came with either 1800 or 2300cc versions of Vauxhall's cast iron slant 4 engine. Bearing in mind that Cortinas came in 1300, 1600 and 2-litre versions, you can see how the Victor was a little bit of a half step up. This particular car is a 2300S, which was a run-out special edition they did for a year or so in 1975 and 76 before bringing in a facelift and rebadging the car as a VX. In fact, fun fact, this one doesn't have Victor badging or indeed VX badging anywhere on it. In fact, it doesn't have any words on it at all, just the 2300S and Vauxhall Griffin badges. It's somewhere towards the upper part of the range. It's got vinyl roof and chrome embellishers everywhere, and 4 separate cloth-covered seats and a cassette player as standard, as well as fake wood trim on the dashboard. It's a carburettor short of being a VX490, the sporty version, which had row-style wheels and other go-faster elements. And then there was the Ventura, which was the 6-cylinder version with a 3.3-litre straight 6 under the bonnet that mainly added weight and understeer to the handling for not very much more in the way of shove. The styling is very sort of cut-down American, as was the fashion with both General Motors and Ford's European divisions at around this time. It's got lots of chrome, it's got hips, it's got a pointy nose, and it's got a wide, sleek tailboard that emphasises width and understated power. It slightly diminishes the effect by having this kind of cross-eyed look in the front, but the VX490 and the Ventura got round this by having twin headlights and the indicators mounted below the bumper. The overall effect is quite swish, and this car these days certainly gets lots of attention from the pavement. It's a sort of Abigail's party version of a Pontiac Catalina. And if I pull off in first gear out of this junction, I've got full-on tyre squealing action on these skinny Maxxis tyres. They're not bad tyres. but they do enable you to drive like a bit of a hooligan or an extra in the Sweeney circa 1975. And that's 30 miles an hour. And that's why I like this car. Ian's absolutely right that while it's not a bad old machine, it doesn't really have very much to latch onto, I think was the phrase he used when we were swapping messages before I made this film. And he's right, it's not particularly distinctive in any respect. But for all that, it's got a lot of charm. It's got a lot of 70s kitsch if you're into that, and it's a big old bus that's actually quite fun to fling about in a slightly irresponsible way. But when I say irresponsible, it feels that way, but really you're only doing 20 miles an hour and you're in full control all the time. The handling is very predictable, and for all that tyre squealing action, it's never out of control. The ride's nice and smooth. It's got a fair amount of wheel travel. It's definitely set up for comfort rather than performance, but it does that pretty well. It can get a little bit unsettled on bumpy road surfaces with that wheel travel, and it does roll a bit in corners, but not uncomfortably so. You don't feel like a ship in a storm. So as you change direction through these switchbacks, it still stays quite composed. You can feel a little bit of it's not so much roll, it's more you can just feel the momentum taking you towards the outside of the bend as it shifts direction. The seats aren't that grippy. Heaven knows what it's like in a 1800 Deluxe with a vinyl bench seat across the front here. You'd be hanging onto the wheel for dear life. As I turn in here, it's nice and smooth. Tiniest line here on this bend. I can go up to fourth already going up this hill, and the torque will just see me through, no problem at all. The engine itself is quite sprightly. Canted over at 45 degrees, it's very over square, so the diameter of the bore is about 28% bigger than the stroke, the up and down movement of the pistons, which makes for lots of torque. That means it can keep up pretty well with modern traffic, and indeed be quite a lot of fun while it's doing it. As long, that is, as you don't want to go too fast. So the challenge with this car is the gearbox. I'm doing 40 miles an hour here in fourth top gear. Although there's response on the throttle, it feels quite revvy and it feels like it could do with another gear. And that's just at 40 miles an hour. What this really needs is a 5-speed gearbox, or at least an overdrive like the VX490 had. And that would make a huge difference to this as a cruising car. As it is, it's otherwise quite relaxed. It feels reasonably solid. The steering it's perhaps a little vague. You've got this big bus-like, thin-rimmed, Bakelite steering wheel, but it goes where you point it. Lots of room in here for me to sit behind myself, loads of knee room, loads of foot room under the seats there, no complicated mechanism under there to get in the way. I've got individually sculpted rear seats here that are actually pretty comfy. They're nice and cosseting, probably more so than the front ones. And this fold down armrest here, no ski hatch to the boot. That was I don't know, probably 10 years after this was introduced. Anyway, stacks of headroom, there's really light, airy cabin, and with these big, deep windows, and just generally a nice place to be. I can wind the windows down. Well, that hasn't moved for a while, has it? But they only go down about a third of the way, because Vauxhall had this styling thing that they were into with not having quarter lights. So you've got this big piece of glass that can only go down so far because the cut-in for the wheel arch gets in the way. So a bit of form over content there from Vauxhall's designers, but it looks good, and it adds to the feeling of airiness. And well, how much air do you need in the back here anyway? Will that go up again? Yes, very sound. Nice chunky door handles, metal door handles. All of this stuff feels like metal of some description, with just plastic knobs and things. You know, it gives it a nice feeling of solidity and just generally being quietly quite classy. So there's a big old boot here. Got a spare wheel in there, complete with its original dog dish hubcap and a 5th chrome trim ring, and a leather belt holding it in place against this brace here. Nice high lift jack and a wheel brace there. So boot goes back for miles, and it's not very deep because you've got a fuel tank and obviously the differential under there as well. I said that this car wasn't historically significant, and that's not strictly true, but not in a particularly good way. It's the last car that was designed in the UK by Vauxhall's own designers, other than making some actually quite good cosmetic changes to Opel cars. Even as this car was being developed, a mandate came down from General Motors leaders in Detroit to say that it should use more shared content with Opel. So it has the floor pan and the bulkheads and the door handles and one or two other bits and pieces from the Opel Record D. The FE Victor is a throwback to a lost age of some fairly solid workmanlike engineering, but glossed over with some shininess and bits of vinyl and chrome and a fairly superficial sort of appeal. It's a rather complacent, middle-class, comfy slippers sort of car, and almost by accident and with the passage of time it's become something that's actually quite fun in a way that its designers didn't particularly intend. But I sound like I'm trying to justify it. I don't really need to do that, because I just like it, and sometimes that's enough. So that's it. I'm off to enjoy a Babycham and a fondant fancy. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, click like and maybe tell a friend, share a link. If you haven't, please let me know in the comments below what I can do to make it better. More content coming up on the Lotus Elite and the XJS, and something new with the Honda Aero Deck, and hopefully getting the BMW E30 road legal. So all of that to come. Do click subscribe if you haven't already, and the notification bell to make sure that you don't miss any of it. In the meantime, thanks very much again for your time. Hope you've enjoyed it and look forward to doing it all again soon.